that I just click on it.
I don't know how to do that either. I don't know. Anyway, okay, so we actually at 1 o'clock. I just got that streaming is going. I'm going to share the page and we'll start learning, I guess. Those who are not here yet,
Okay.
will be able to catch up with the recording. Okay, I see John just arrived. Let me share the screen. Hi, John. Welcome.
How you
Hello,
doing?
John. Hello, John.
Dave.
Let me share the screen. If I can ask everyone to mute and we'll get started. Okay, so we continue with the laws of the red heifer, as it's known, the para aduma, in the preparation of the mixture of the water, which we discussed, and the ashes, which we discussed, and who and how this is actually done, and some of the conditions of transporting these mixtures. Okay, so chapter 10, there's 10 halachot, and we'll go through it. When a person draws water to be sanctified, he does not have to be the person who's sanctified and sprinkles the water on an impure person. In other words, it doesn't have to be the same person who prepares it and actually sprinkles it. Instead, another person may sanctify it and another may sprinkle it. In fact, what he's emphasizing is that each step can be done by different people. One person can collect the water, the next person can be the one to sanctify it with the ashes, and a third person can then be the one to actually sprinkle it. And furthermore, he may sanctify it in a different container, pour the sanctified water from one container to another, and sprinkle it from a different container. Of course, there are other concerns, because we've spoken about you're not allowed to mix other water, you're not allowed to use it for other things. So long as everything else is equal, as you don't get involved in any other activity, you don't use it for any other purpose, there's no other water in the new container that might contaminate it. But strictly speaking, just moving it from one container to another would be fine. In other words, the point of the halacha is that it doesn't have to be the same person, nor the same vessel that is initially filled, that ultimately will be the one that will sprinkle on the person that needs the sanctification process. Halacha 2. A person may draw water from the ashes of the red heifer and keep it in his possession without sanctifying it for as long as he desires. Now again, we spoke about concerns about a person not taking their mind off the job at hand, not getting involved in doing other things in the meantime. So this is theoretically, as long as he's not doing anything that's going to completely consider distraction or an aversion from the job at hand, he can stay there as long as he wants. There is no difficulty in this. He may transport it from place to place and from city to city and then place ashes upon it and sanctify it whenever he desires. Again, so long as all other concerned are taken care of, that it doesn't come into contact with impurity or he doesn't get too distracted, he can keep transferring it. That in and of itself is not an issue. Similarly, a person may keep sanctified water in his possession for many days or years and sprinkle from it on any day that he needs to until it is used up. He may transport it from place to place and from city to city. So the first part of the law is talking about the water that was collected in order to sanctify the water. Here we're talking about the water that's already sanctified, what we call either the mei nida or mei chatat, meaning it already has the ashes mixed into it. So he says you can keep it, you can transport it. Similarly, a person may keep the ashes of the red heifer in his possession and transport it from place to place, from city to city. Once a container in which the ashes of the red heifer were held was transported. So that's the rule. Now Rambam tells us of an incident which is reported in the earlier sources in the Gemara. Tells a story. Once a container in which the ashes of the red heifer were held was transported on a ship on the Jordan River, and an olive-sized portion of a corpse was discovered on the bottom of the ship, making the water impure. Meaning there was a source of impurity, and now the water was in the vicinity, and it became susceptible to that. So that obviously that water can no longer be used as purification. So what happened was, at that time, the High Court decreed that the water for the ashes of the red heifer and the ashes themselves should not be transported on a river nor on a ship. Okay, similarly, one should not float them on the water, nor should a person stand on one side of the river and throw them to the other side of the river. A person may, however, pass through water until he reaches his neck while holding the ashes of a red heifer or sanctified water. In other words, what they did was they made a decree that covered basically the scenario that had transpired in which the meichatat has become disqualified. So you can't put it on a river, you can't float it on a river or on a ship. But what is if you need to get it across the river? So you can walk through the river and holding it up, basically. That's what he's saying over here. Okay. Similarly, a person and empty containers that were purified for the ashes of the red heifer and water that was drawn for the sake of the ashes of the red heifer that was not sanctified may be transported on a river and on a ship. Now, again, he's emphasizing that the Gzeira, the particular decree, was only for a very narrow, as it were, comparable circumstance to the episode that had occurred. But even though we're always concerned about these vessels and we're concerned about the water that is drawn, it does not have the same decree on it. You would be we're only talking about either mei chatat, in other words, it's water that already has the ashes in it, or the ashes themselves that this decree applies to. One further amendment to this, in halacha 3, sanctified water may be transported on the Mediterranean Sea and may be floated on such water. In other words, the decree is only on rivers, not on the sea. The decree encompasses only sanctified water and ashes on a river and not other bodies of water, as it were, not the sea itself. Halacha 4. And by the way, and this is just generally in line with how a gezerah, these certain degrees, would be enacted. I guess when I think about this, I think about some of the government regulations around, trying to respond to the coronavirus. A lot of it doesn't make sense in every circumstance, but at some point, but they'll make certain decrees to at least keep you safe in certain areas. Okay? And it seems that that's what the Chacham, we'll see soon other examples of where they'll make a decree and will apply in one situation, but not in another. And you might ask yourself, well, if it's a worthy decree, then it should apply everywhere. And if it's an unworthy decree, then it shouldn't apply anywhere. But that's the nature of decrees. They basically are there to protect as much as you can, even as you recognize that it's not foolproof. So you have the biblical concern is not that it shouldn't come in contact with a source of impurity. Technically speaking, just transporting it is not an issue. But it once transpired that a particular situation occurred where it came into contact with a source of impurity of a corpse by transporting it on a ship over the river. So they made a decree in that particular area. So we've created a little bit of a safety net, as it were, but they won't extend it beyond that. Okay, halacha 4. When a person is transporting water to be sanctified, and needless to say, water that has been sanctified, so either it's the water that you collected or it's already been mixed, he should not sling. This is the point I was thinking of. He should not sling the container over his back, but instead should carry it in front of him, as the pasuk says, as a safekeeping, as water for sprinkling. In other words, you got to know where it is. One can infer when it is washed, it may be used as water for sprinkling. But if you're putting it on your back, you're not actually. It's not in your view the whole time. It's disqualified. But now listen to this. But he said, if a person filled 2 jugs, he should carry one in front of him and he can carry the other one behind him. In other words, I assume if you got 2 jugs and you've got a pole or something, you put the one in the front and one in the back. He says that's fine because it's impossible to do otherwise. Meaning you can't carry 2 jugs in any other way. So you're going to have one behind and one in front. So they don't extend there. Although ideally you want to be able to see what you're transporting, and we're trying to enact that. But in a situation where it would require you to either do 2 trips or where it's impossible to carry both in front, then they don't make that decree. Again, it's along this line that you'll protect as much as you can, but you're not going to overreach. Okay, halacha 5. When water for the ashes of the red heifer were weighed on a scale, it is disqualified if one diverted his attention from it. If not, it's acceptable. So you put it onto the scale. There's no problem weighing it. That's the point. So long as you kept your intention, which we've discussed previously, is so important. If, however, one weighed other entities with the water for the ashes of the red heifer, it's disqualified. In other words, if you put the water on the one side because you knew it weighed a pound, and you put something else on it to see what the weight was, well, now you're using the water as a weight. It's now been used in the process of activity that disqualifies it. The rationale is that since one has used it as a weight, it is not considered to have been watched because it's been used for something else, which we said disqualifies. All of the pure individuals who draw water sanctify it and sprinkle it. And similarly, all of the utensils used for drawing water sanctify it and sprinkling it. are all acceptable if they were immersed on that day, even though the night is not fallen upon them. Remember, we discussed this idea of tful yom. When a person becomes impure, they have to go to mikveh, and then usually for the full purification, they're going to wait till the night time. We learned that the halacha is that when it comes to the preparation of the ashes for the red heifer, you could be tful yom, which means to say that as long as you've gone to mikveh, you can engage in this process, even if the sun is not yet set. So the Rambam, we've learned this already, and the Rambam's just emphasizing that it applies to everything, to the utensils, to each individual at any step of the process, not just the ones that we described previously of preparing the water and so on. And here again, he emphasized something very unique. Let's just finish the sentence. For all the activities involved in the red heifer, drawing the water and sprinkling, acceptable when performed by individuals who had immersed that day, as we've explained, even if Harav Shimshon has not yet happened, even if the sun is not yet set. And then he goes on to emphasize something which we learned already about the individual that was preparing the ashes. He says, because of the Sadducees, remember the Tzedukim had surmised that this halacha would apply also to those preparing the red heifer, that you have to wait for the sunset. The Chachamim say, no, you don't have to wait for the sunset. And therefore, they would intentionally bring these individuals and these utensils into contact with impurity, dip them in a mikveh, and use them immediately to show that the correct understanding of the mitzvah is not as the Tzedukim had it, who would have wanted you to wait till the night, but the correct understanding of the mitzvah is that so long as you've gone to mikveh, you can help prepare the ashes, you can collect the water, you can transport the water, you can mix the ashes in the water, and you can sprinkle it, all can be done, and the vessels that are used, same rule applies. Halacha 6. Everyone is acceptable to sprinkle the water with the ashes of the red heifer, with the exception of a woman. A tumtum is someone who has no clear sexual organs. An androgynous is someone who has both, or a deaf mute, and an intellectually and or emotionally compromised person, and a man who is not intellectually mature. So those people can't do it. In other words, what he's saying really, it doesn't have to be just a Kohen, it can be a regular Israelite. Similarly, an uncircumcised person is acceptable. Why? Because although there's certain restrictions on an uncircumcised person, but an uncircumcised person is not impure. And you just need someone pure, and you need somebody that understands what's going on. When an intellectually immature man sprinkles such water, and a woman helps him, this is an example of where you have two people involved in the process, one who is not supposed to be doing this process, one who is allowed to do the process. So in this example, it's an intellectually mature minor and a woman. If she holds the water in her hand, and then he's the one that dips the thing and sprinkles, the sprinkling is acceptable, provided that she does not hold his hand when he's sprinkling. If she held his hand while he is sprinkling, then the sprinkling is unacceptable. In other words, these people that we said cannot do the sprinkling can provide an assisting role. Halacha 7. The person sprinkling the water must have the intent to sprinkle on the impure person to purify him. This is very important. We've learned a few times here about intention and how intention will inform the outcome of something. So when the person dips and sprinkles, you have to have an intention that the reason I'm doing this is for the process of purification of these individuals before me. If you sprinkled without such an intent, the sprinkling is invalid. Interesting, the person upon whom the water is sprinkled, by contrast, does not need to have any intent. Instead, water may be sprinkled on a person with or without their knowledge, and as long as the person who's doing the sprinkling intends purification, it will do the job. When a person has the intent to sprinkle such water in front of himself, so he puts the hyssop branch in, and he's thinking he's going to sprinkle forward, and someone picks it up and he goes backwards, and there was someone standing behind him, and the water sprinkled on the person behind. Okay, or he was thinking about the person behind him, and he in practice he covers the person in front of him. In both these cases, the sprinkling is invalid. Okay, in other words, it has to. By contrast, if he had intent to sprinkle such water in front of himself and he sprinkled in front, but to the sides, his sprinkling is acceptable. Now, imagine there's a few people who come and need to be sprinkled, and you intend to sprinkle forward and you sprinkle backwards by mistake. The guy behind, that's no good. Or if you intended to sprinkle the guy behind you and you sprinkle the guy in front of you, that's no good. But if your intention was to sprinkle forward for the purpose of purification, and there's a few people on there, and your intention was the guy directly in front of you, but it reached to the sides as well, that's fine. That's fine, because that's all considered within one focus, one intention. Halacha 8. The person sprinkling water need not dip the hyssop in the water for every sprinkling. So you have to dip and sprinkle. Remember when we learned about the blood from the animal that you sprinkled before you prepare the ashes, there you have to dip, sprinkle. And then you have to clean off the blood, dip, sprinkle. Over here, if you dip the branch in, so long as there's moisture and the drops will come off, you can keep sprinkling. He says instead he may dip the hyssop and sprinkle once and again until the water is complete. He may even sprinkle on many people or utensils at once, even up to 100 people. And as so long as every one of them is touched by the smallest amount of water, they will be purified, provided that the person that's sprinkling has intention that he's going to purify. Kent, last week you asked a question about how much we've only had 9 cows, right? How much ash are you going to get? So I think between yesterday's halachot and today's halacha, we see that you can create a huge amount of liquid water that could be used, because you can have a large amount of water with a little bit of ash to transform that whole thing into mei chatat or mei midah. And in order for a person to be purified by it, they just need the smallest drop had to touch them. Now, if one dipped the hyssop with the intent of sprinkling on an entity that is susceptible to ritual impurity or a person, and instead sprinkled the water on an entity that was not susceptible to ritual impurity or an animal, in other words, he dipped it thinking he's going to use it correctly. Then he used it on something that's not relevant. He need not dip the hyssop again if their water remained on it. In other words, we said the first halacha was you can dip and keep sprinkling. What he's emphasizing is that even if you sprinkled on something that didn't require sprinkling, you could still use the water that remains on there to sprinkle the next person. However, the rationale is that at the outset he dipped it in the water in an acceptable manner. If by contrast, however, right, he dipped the hyssop in water in order to sprinkle it on an entity that is not susceptible to ritual impurity or an animal, and sprinkled it on an impure man or utensil, the sprinkling is invalid until he dips the hyssop in the water a second time, right? Because if you dip, basically he's telling you your intention was not correct at the time. When you dipped it in and you thought you were going to sprinkle on something that's not susceptible to tumah, then your intention is an incorrect intention. So even though now you sprinkle on someone who needs it, no good. Well, right, it has to be the right intention. Halacha 9, if he dipped the hyssop in water with the intent of sprinkling on an entity that is not susceptible to ritual impurity, the water that drips from the hyssop are still acceptable. Therefore, if it drips into a container and one dips the hyssop in it with the intent of sprinkling it on an entity that is susceptible to ritual impurity, the sprinkling is acceptable. What he's saying is like this: you dipped it with the intention of sprinkling on something that doesn't use it. Then you move it over and it's dripping, right? It's dripping into a new vessel. He says what you could do then is you could take the hyssop again, re-dip it into that water that has dripped off, and with the correct intention, you can use it. In other words, what he's saying is it doesn't fundamentally disqualify the water. It just disqualifies it for in that moment, like that dip, you can't use to sprinkle. But if some of that water dripped off into a new vessel, which you could then dip into separately with intention, that would be okay. Halacha 10, final halacha. Although the volume of the water, the ashes of the red heifer has been reduced, one may dip even the tip of the hyssop stalks and sprinkle, provided one does not use it like a sponge. What we mean is like this, is that even if there's the smallest amount of water in the vessel that has this sanctification water, and even if just the tip of the hyssop touches it, but there's enough moisture that you can sprinkle, that's fine. He says, so long as you don't have to sweep around the branch to get a bit of moisture. Then that's what it means when he says use it like a sponge. You have to start sweeping around the bottom of the barrel, as it were. That's an indication that it's no good, that it's not enough water, because then it's no longer considered dipping. It's considered wiping in order to get it wet. No good. Now he says, when a flask has a thin opening, so the flask is where you have the mei chatat in it, he may dip and withdraw the hyssop in the ordinary manner and then sprinkle with it. And then he need not be careful that it does not touch the sides of the container a second time. So there's a discussion in the Mishnah about this, where there's sometimes concern that if you've dipped and then some of the moisture goes on the side and you dip again, that the moisture that you're going to get is not actually the moisture from the bottom. He says we're not concerned about it when it comes to this. You can dip through a narrow opening, and you can do it once, you can do it twice, and as long as you get the moisture, we can assume it's been dipped in properly, and you can then sprinkle onto the person that needs it.
Rabbi, before we start on the questions, the quiz, could
Yes.
we go? I'm confused between halacha 5 and 6. They seem to, 6 seems to contradict 5, because 5
Which part of
says, 5 says that it cannot be done by a woman. Was it 5 or
6 and 7, I think you're talking about.
oh, maybe 6 and 7? Yes, it says with the exception of a woman, tumtum, etc. But
Yes.
then in 7, it says
A child and a woman. No, it's the end of
Yes.
it's the end of 6, you mean? The end of 6. It's within 6
Yes.
itself. Yeah. So
Yes.
what he's clarifying is that the actual sprinkling cannot be done by a woman, but a woman can play an assisting role. In other words, like the example that Rambam gives, a minor, a child who is considered to have maturity and understanding can do the sprinkling, but let's say he's assisted by his mother. So that's fine. As long as she holds the vessel, then he dips, that's fine. But he must do the sprinkling without assistance.
yeah.
That's the point.
Because he is already intellectually mature.
So he's acceptable for it. And the point of it, is that although we said a woman cannot do the actual sprinkling, like some of the others he's listed, they can play an assisting role.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the questions. Let me make this slightly smaller so we can see it on the screen at the same time. Should a person who draws the water be the one to sanctify it?
No, number 2.
Not necessarily, right? Excellent. Which of the following people may not sprinkle the sanctified water? Woman, an intellectually mature minor, an uncircumcised person.
Number 1.
One.
Number 1, okay.
Yeah.
3, who is required to have the proper intent when the sprinkling of the water is performed? Is it the person sprinkling or is it the person who's being sprinkled?
Number 1.
Okay, the person who's doing the sprinkling. And 4, these are easy today, or we've just been paying attention. May more than one person be sprinkled on at the same time?
Yes.
Yes, even
Number
if a
1.
small drop touches, right?
Number 1.
It will still be fine.
Yeah.
Okay, Yashikach, excellent. I don't know how many of you are fasting, but if you are, I hope that goes well to the rest of the fast, and I hope you get to hear the Megillah tonight, wherever you are, and enjoy the celebrations of Purim.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Wish you all the best. Friends,
Chag
Thank you,
Purim
thank you.
Sameach to everyone.
Thank you all.